Over and over again, they admit that they clearly saw how badly injured he was.
The first thing that struck me was that this man is seriously injured. I can see even from clear back at the car, he has burns. He's lost a lot of blood. He's got blood all over himself. He appears to be just kind of catatonic. He's not looking up at us. He's not doing anything. He's just sitting just like this. He's not doing anything. Just sitting there. I tell him I don't see a weapon. Do you? And he said no. And I told him I'm going to transition to non-lethal. I'm going to take my taser out. And so as we get out of the car and start towards him, I deadline my shotgun right there and go for my taser.
I gave him the command to show me his hands, and he showed me his hands right away.
I said, okay, I don't see any weapons, do you? And he said no.
Some people thought he might have had a gun.
I said, okay, I don't see any weapons, do you? And he said no.
Deputy Willard and I started to approach him, tell him to get on his stomach.
And I had my taser on the guy, and I'm talking to him the whole way I'm walking up there. I'm saying, sir, we're going to get you. I think I even went on the radio and said code 3 medical.
Edward 2, code 3 medical, shots fired.
I think I even went on the radio and said code 3 medical.
Code 3 medical, shots fired. Shots fired.
And I said, sir, we're going to get you some help. And really, as I got up to him and saw him sitting there in the condition of the burns, and I'm sort of assessing him physically, my main concern at that point is, well, two things. One, I decide I'm not going to let this man leave here again. I'm not going to let this man leave here. I'm not going to let this man leave. I'm not going to let this man leave here, because we'd heard some pretty bizarre behavior. But secondly, and almost as important, was I need to get this man medical help. He needs help right now. But I need to make sure we're safe. We're safe. Make sure we're safe. We're safe. Make sure we're safe. We're safe. So I tell him I need him to turn around and lay down, or to lay back and on his stomach on the concrete, on the pavement.
At what point did you see the burns to the person?
As soon as we pulled up.
Laid back on the concrete.
Have you dealt with burn victims before?
Yes, many times. Burned flesh on the concrete.
Did they take a first aid class? Any first aid course is going to tell you, you don't make a burn victim. Lay on the ground.
We told him to get on the ground. He said, he was saying, okay. Then he wouldn't get on the ground.
Just kind of catatonic state.
He wouldn't get on the ground. And we were like, get on your stomach, get on the ground. And he'd be like, okay, no.
And he looks up at me and he says, no. Catatonic state, just kind of catatonic.
He wouldn't get on his stomach, and we told him to move to the grass and get on his stomach because of the concerns about the asphalt and the heat because it was a hot day. And he wouldn't comply with that.
And I said, you've got to do this. I need you to lay down. And he says, no, again.
Then we had told him to get on his stomach or he'd be tased.
You're going to be tased if you don't lay down. I repeated that several times. And again, he just kind of leaned forward and went back to just ignoring me. Just kind of catatonic.
We wanted him to lie on his stomach so that we could get him in restraints.
He's not doing anything.
Just sitting there.
Kind of catatonic. And so I said, I told him, I said, look over there, you see the grass. I think I said, look to your right, you see the grass. And he looked over and said, yes. And I said, go over and carefully go over there and lay down on the grass. I thought that's going to be cooler, and he might accept that. And he said, okay. And then he just sat there, and I said, you need to do that now. Go over and lay down on the grass. And he said again, okay. And I said, are you going to do that? And he just sat there. I don't think there was any response at that point. And he just sat there, and he just sat there, and he just sat there, and he just sat there. At that point, I was just about to deploy the taser. And he just sat there, and he just sat there. He's not doing anything.
Just sitting there.
I was just about to deploy the taser.
Why would they start tasing him? He wasn't doing anything. They've just told us he's sitting on the ground in a catatonic state. Why? Why would they start tasing him?
I was just about to deploy the taser, and the Sandy officer deployed the taser. He's not doing anything, he's not doing anything.
Just sitting there.
Just ignoring me, which was actually, from a tactical standpoint, better because he was behind him and had the fold back, which is from training, that is the actually best shot. You will affect more of the muscle tissues.
Why?
The Sandy officer deployed the taser.
And at this point, I walked behind Deputy Willard and walked around to the rear of the subject to try to get a better shot with the taser gun with him.
And he just sat there, hanging, burned flesh, just sat there.
I got behind him, and at this point I had put my firearm away, and I had my taser out. And turned it on and got behind him and told him again to lay on his stomach or he'd be tased.
He appears to be just kind of catatonic.
He didn't, and at that point I discharged my taser weapon and got a good shot with the taser on. Both prongs went in his back.
Burned flesh. Seriously injured. He had loose, hanging, burned flesh.
Kind of a few times he just kind of sat there while he was, before I tased him, just kind of sat there and shook his head. Before I tased him, just kind of sat there and shook his head, sat there and shook his head, and just kind of sat there and shook his head.
This young man was very badly injured. I cannot understand how he could have been tased.
Before I tased him, just kind of sat there and shook his head.
What this is torture. There can be no other word for what these two men did here. They approached a man who was bleeding, burned, and in shock. A man who, by their own admission, was in a catatonic state and was unable to comply. And they tasered him.
And he flopped backwards on the ground.
Is this right? Is it right for a police officer to see a man who had been injured, who was in an accident, wanting to get medical aid after they were called by someone saying that there's an injured man here, when the police officers arrive on the scene with no love in their heart for an injured young man? They take out their gun, they taser, and they tase them. Is that right? No! I'm asking you the question, is that right?
No! You said that he was burned, had some burns on his body. Were these minor burns, moderate burns, severe burns?
I'm not obviously a medical person, but they seemed severe enough to me. He had loose, hanging, burned flesh, at least a couple of layers down.
And he just had blood all over him. From, I don't know if it's from a car accident, and initially saw that as soon as we pulled up.
Any civilized human being who see a young man who needs help gonna provide the necessary help to that young man without trying to tase him with his gun.
And after the first time I tased him, and just from his behavior and the ineffectiveness of the taser, you know, I even made the comment to Deputy Willard because of his behavior, and like, I don't want to get hands-on with this guy.
Don't want to get hands-on? All he's done is just sit there on the ground. They keep saying how scary he was, how much of a monster he was. This makes it easier in their minds to justify what they have done.
I just knew that if we were to get hands-on with him in a physical fight, I mean, there would have been no stopping it. I mean, he would have not felt anything.
But what was so scary? So far, all they've said is that he was bloody. That's it.